Okay, so I think you are all subscribed to the Telegram channel. I sent you a few news about the course. One is there is the schedule until more or less mid-May. Okay, so you have an idea of what we are going to do for Easter and all the vacations that we have on the schedule. Okay, so basically today we are here. Okay, introduction to React. We are starting to talk about React. Tomorrow there is the lab. I remind you that first half is in R3B, so it's different from last week, and it's actually the final room, hopefully for the semester. And the second half, I mean, for the other group of the lab is 10I as usual. Okay, there will be my colleague tomorrow, just for tomorrow. And Thursday another lecture, and again Monday, Tuesday. Okay, and then that's all before Easter. Okay, we are not going to have the lecture on Thursday, Thursday 17th. Okay, I mean, since I try to have a bit of more free time around Easter, because typically people leave and so on. So and also it's easy to accommodate in this schedule, so I did it. And after Easter, Easter lasts 1 week for this year, because the Politecnico decided to have a lecture on Thursday, the one we will not have. Okay, and it starts the week after, so Monday 28th, and we resume as usual. And just be careful, because we are going to eat both the 1st of May, which is national holiday, and I think also the 2nd of July. Okay, and the rest is okay. I mean, there will be 1 week in the 5th of May, which unfortunately neither me nor my colleague will be present. And so you will have Thursday 8th of May, lab with my colleague, okay, because I'm away abroad. And then everything should be as usual, okay, until the end of the course. Nothing else, at least for the moment, is expected, okay? Okay, so this has been updated, I think Friday, last Friday, so I mean, we'll try to follow this schedule. So today we are going to talk about React, okay? So React, and we have a couple of set of slides, but as usual we will experiment together, also because tomorrow you will experiment by yourself trying to use React, okay? So slides 301, React introduction, okay? So that's the first slide. I mean, what if I told you that everything you know is wrong? Actually, it's not wrong, but I mean, it's not that useful. I mean, we need to have experimented in the browser as you did in the last two labs. But to some of you who were in the lab, I already told you, well, we are going to leave everything there and we are going to start with React, but we need to know what React is doing under the hood. Okay, so what is the React library doing with the DOM and so on. And you try to manipulate the DOM, right? And you saw how much it is difficult. It's very difficult, it's very inconvenient, it's very time consuming and so on. Okay, even if you ask ChatGPT to write the code, okay, because then you have to check what it did and so on. Okay, so basically we need a framework, something that helps us to write the code for a web application in a more efficient way. Okay, and so that's the goal of today, introducing React, and also experiment with the first concept of React. Why React? Well, React is very commonly used nowadays. Many websites use React. Also, it's very well maintained, supported. Actually, last version 19, just was released at the end of last year. Seems quite a lot of time, but I mean, not so much. I mean, I think previous one was 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's quite stable framework. So we are not going to learn something that has been just introduced last year. Okay. of course, you always find the links here. Basically, React was introduced by Facebook. Okay, Facebook had to solve the same problems for a very big web application, right? And so they introduced this framework that actually is now released open source with a permissive license, so you don't learn something that then you cannot actually really use in your applications, or you risk it being closed and so on. Okay. So why a library? Simplify the browser environment, because you saw how it's difficult to program using directly the methods provided by the DOM. Well, actually, there are quite a lot of them. We saw it in the lab, but also, and we didn't see this in the lab. Sometimes some elements in HTML have sets of methods which are not really intuitive, especially forms, which are the ways in which the user interacts with the web application. And so this library tries to actually abstracts from the DOM, the actual browser DOM, and provides us with a set of methods which is very uniform and intuitive. Okay. We can define higher level components as simple HTML elements. You can define, let's say, blocks, but not in the form of divs like the ones you saw in the lab, but really in the form of components. Let's define, I don't know, a calendar component, a component that shows a list of items, stuff like that, higher level components. Okay, so that you can reuse code. It's like functions in normal programming. Okay, but in the web environment. And then it provides us with automatic processing of events and updates. Okay, and we will talk a lot about this later. It simplifies the development, of course, but we need to be careful to follow the React programming patterns. But we saw during last editions of this course, this is not that difficult. I mean, you learn how to program in React and then you follow that pattern. It's pretty simple in a certain sense. It's quite intuitive as well. Of course, there has been a lot of plugins, extension, and things developed for React, like Bootstrap components. Components mean something designed explicitly for React, so higher level elements. Okay, than HTML element. But of course, nothing comes for free, and what we pay is that we need to be careful in handling the state of the client application. We will talk about this a lot, actually next Thursday, because it's a really important part of the web application. There's plenty of resources online. I mean, these are just links, react.dev. I mean, every couple of years they change the link, but actually the content is almost the same. Sometimes they update the documentation. I think it's more readable now than it was a few years ago. So that's a good news. And also we have browser development tools. As you have the inspector in all browsers, you have a tool which is actually a browser extension that allows you to debug React applications more easily. Sometimes it's convenient. You find the links here, and I want to show you. I already installed this in the browser just to show you an example in Firefox. I think more tools. There's what is it? Extensions. Okay. Extensions, React, but you can find the link in the slide. Okay. Well, actually, it's already installed. Okay. What is the tab that shows? This button in Firefox, extensions. I always forget. Okay. This page doesn't appear to be using React. Okay. Okay. This is to open the React extension, but there's a menu somewhere, right? I don't remember where it is in the menu. Extension for develop. There should be in the extension, but right. Let me search extensions. Well, sorry, I don't remember where it is. Anyway, you can install it. Okay. add. Just be careful. I mean, these plugins have the possibility to access everything you navigate on. Okay. If you trust it, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to show you the window, but I cannot find it right now. Add-ons. Here it is. Okay, add-ons. Okay, so that's React Developer Tools. Okay, manage. Actually, I mean, there's not so much to manage. I mean, just you know, enable or disable. And when later today, we will create the first React application. We will open it and we will see what it shows. Basically, it allows us to navigate through the React components, okay, which are not a standard element of the browser, so we need something in addition to navigate inside those components. Okay, fine. So go back to the slides. And so first, a very quick introduction to the design principles of React. So React has a declarative approach. It means that you will never write code that explicitly manipulate DOM. So that's why we had the first slide, right? You learned how to manipulate DOM, append child, create node, and stuff like that. This is done by React, and we will never do this in React. It's wrong to do something like this at the exam with React, okay? Because React is in charge of manipulating the DOM. That's why we want the library, the framework, because it's difficult to correctly manipulate the DOM and do it efficiently as well. Okay, and so what are we going to do in React? Well, in React we are declaring what we would like to have. Okay, so just define how each component is going to render itself. So how each component is shown on the screen. So it's a table. Okay, we will use a table. You will use TRTD, the rows and columns and stuff. You will put this in the first column and so on and so on. And then React will take care of creating the HTML elements, appending them in the DOM, removing what is not shown anymore, update the content of the text and everything for us. Okay? And so you declare what you would like to have in the browser view, and React takes care of updating the view when it's necessary. Okay? It follows a functional design approach. That is also why we introduced this functional programming in the beginning of the course, because basically every component for React is a function, a JavaScript function, okay, that is called by React to know how it should appear at that time instant. Okay, we will see what it is, what this virtual DOM means, and so on. Okay, and we are in charge of managing the state of the application. The state will be contained in some components, and when we will change the state, React will take care of updating everything according to the new state. Okay, and it will be more clear in a minute. Okay, so in short, basically a React application is a set of functions that takes as parameter some state of the application, like I have a list of items and the state contains the items, or maybe I have a pop-up or I don't know, a list which is open or closed. That's a binary state, and a set of props, okay, which are other parameters that we can pass to the function that define a component. And this function simply return how the component should be rendered according to the state and props that is passed to this component. Additionally, many components don't need to manage a state. Okay, in simple applications, web applications, the state is quite simple. It's basically the data that we need to show plus some presentation state, items which are closed or open, checkbox clicked, not clicked, content of the form, and so on. Okay, something more or less simple. Okay. Okay, from now on we will call props the properties that we will pass to the React components. Okay, this F that it will be the React components. It's just a jargon from React. Okay, they call them props, and we will call them props. Okay. The fact that the component is just a function of props, it means that if the props or the state plus props are the same, the component is going to render itself in the same exact way. Okay, so it's idempotent and immutable, so it means that the result is the same. Okay, if the props or the state plus the props are the same, the result, the visual result, is the same. Okay, so now you might ask, what's the difference between props and state? Well, props are immutable by the component, so they are just parameters passed to the component, so they are external. It cannot be changed by the component. That's a functional programming approach, right? You get something and you return something new. In this case, it's the part of the user interface. Okay, while the state can be changed, but only through special calls, because in this way we will notify React of the fact that we changed the state, and it will update the user interface accordingly. Okay. Okay, functions are pure, but this is the functional programming paradigm. Okay, so we must not have side effects beside computing the return value in the functions. Okay, so we cannot keep let's say local variables, whatever it means, in functions that implements React components. Okay, if we have some variable that needs to change and we need to keep track of, that is a state, and we will see how it can be handled by React. Okay. So the application is basically a set of components. There's an initial component that contains other components and so on, like the body that contains a div and then header and table and whatever you need for your application. Okay, and actually the entire application is re-rendered, so redrawn on the screen, every time a state is changed and every time a prop or property is changed. Okay, that's at least in theory for the React model. Okay, and this means that each function of each component will be called, a piece of the user interface will be returned, and then this user interface will be composed, and we will redraw, our React will redraw the content of the browser window. Okay, and this can lead to minor variation or radically different view. Okay, and of course you understand that if every time we change something, a single variable, means a property or a state in JavaScript for our components, everything has to be recomputed and re-rendered. What is the performance of this system? Well, actually, if I tell the story like this, it seems very bad, but of course it's not, because I'm telling you to use the React. And so actually, since modifications to the DOM are expensive for the browser, so you say append a new child somewhere in the DOM, remove an element, change the style, and so on, and every time you make a modification, the browser has to recompute the layout and the appearance of some part of the interface. React, to avoid to incur in this expensive operation, implements a virtual DOM layer. Okay, so basically React, the library, has a sort of mirror in the memory of the actual DOM of the browser, which is very well optimized and very fast to update. And by the way, having this layer, this allows to correct some DOM anomalies and asymmetries, the stuff I was telling you before. In some forms, the value is contained in the property value. In some others, it's I don't know, in text or whatever its name, and so on. So sometimes you need to add an event listeners on some nodes in some ways, and so on. This has been made uniform by React through this virtual DOM, because we don't interact with the actual DOM of the browser, and we only interact with this virtual DOM. Also, events have been virtualized as well. These synthetic events are basically virtualized events, and then they map on the actual events in the browser. Okay, but this mapping has been done by the library, and we don't really need to care about the actual mapping. We just need to care about the events that are interesting for us, and they are exposed to us in a very well and uniform way. So let's come back to what we were saying before. We said we change the property or the state. Actually, these components have to be re-rendered, and React computes the difference between the old virtual DOM and the new virtual DOM, and only the modifications are applied to the browser DOM in batch, so in a very efficient way. Okay, and also remember, we say that these are pure functions. The components are pure functions. So if the prop of a component doesn't change, we don't have to call, actually React doesn't have to call the function of the component, because the result is expected to be the same. Okay, if we implemented the component correctly, the result is the same. So this function is not called again. Again, if the state and props is the same, the result is the same. Okay, so basically React is in charge of understanding which is the effect of changing a property and the state on the various components that compose the application, and compute the new virtual DOM basically by only calling the functions of the affected components. It computes the difference, and then it goes and implements the differences inside the actual DOM. So the new view appears in the browser window. Okay, so it's a long story, but you will see that it's very easy to use, because basically we define the components, we only care about the appearance of the components, and the rest is done by React. Okay, this is just an introduction to tell you how it works. So a new virtual DOM tree is constructed every time something changes, a new state or props. And React does this diff, and it computes what has to be changed in the actual DOM, and then it goes and it changes the actual DOM. Okay, in a very efficient way. Indeed, I mean, it's meant to be used also for big websites with many components, many parts in the browser window. Okay, it's been designed by Facebook and so on, which had the problem of updating the user interface every time something happened, some state changed in the application, with I would say thousands of elements on the screen. Okay, in the browser window. Okay, synthetic events. React implements its own event system. Well, basically the advantage is that normalizes events across browsers. Means we don't have to care about browser implementations or how events are implemented for each single HTML element, especially forms. And we have a uniform interface. But when it's time, we will see how to use them. And basically it will be again add event listen and something, but I mean we will do always the same call without caring about you know, the strange and sometimes weird behavior of the DOM due to the legacy implementations. Okay, so how do we integrate the React code into the DOM? Well, actually it's the same you did in the lab for your JavaScript code. Basically, you have an entry point, you get the element by ID, and you create a new element, and then you append the stuff, right? And we have two functions, two React functions, create root and then render, just to say, you know, put the stuff here and proceed with creating the content, okay? Actually, this code will be provided to us by the template that we are going to see in a minute, okay? But it's just the conceptual framework. So since we want React to manage the whole application, we will have basically a root ID on the body, in short, and everything will be managed by React in the browser window, okay? Of course, writing things in this way is very inconvenient, right? Well, this is a bit more convenient because it looks like HTML, but this is not JavaScript, right? So, luckily, the guys who invented React also introduced a JavaScript ex syntax. That means ex means XML, so it's sort of it's connected to HTML, okay? And you can write stuff like this, and there will be a transpiler, so basically a translator that will translate the HTML-like code into something that is actually JavaScript calls using the React methods provided by the React library. Okay, so in short, let's say we would like to render these three HTML elements, div, h1, and p. We write as we are used to do in HTML, okay, as you did in the lab in last week, and basically this will be automatically translated into calls to React functions according to what is needed. Okay, we just have to follow this JSX syntax, but that can be directly written inside the JavaScript code. Okay, because actually this file, before being interpreted by JavaScript, will be translated by a program that is provided together with React. Okay, we will have to pay attention just to a few things that are listed in the following. So, components. Everything on a page is a component. It's fine. Components, of course, may be nested. Okay, there's this method, the render, that we saw before, but actually it has to be called only at the beginning when the application is loaded. So the template that we are going to use to implement our React application already does it for us. I will show it to you, but we only read it. Okay, so how can we create components? Well, actually we define JavaScript functions and we provide a return value. Okay, it can be the JSX stuff that we saw before, but it can depend also on something that we pass as parameter, and here as parameter there is only one parameter that we can pass, that are the props. Okay, this function is meant to be a React component, so React will call it with just one single parameter, which are the props that this component takes or receives. Okay, so in short, we don't have to have fixed output from our component, because this would be quite useless, right? I mean, if it's fixed, we can just directly write HTML. It can depend on something which is passed to the component, so the props, and from the props we can use any property that we like. Actually, props is a JavaScript object. That's a typical, well, actually the situation with React. Okay, it's a JavaScript component. Can be, I mean, without properties, but so, I mean, the component does nothing, or can have some properties, and we can use the properties in the JSX to, for instance, include some dynamic parts like text, title here, description, whatever. Okay. There are basically two types of React components: presentational components, and container components. The presentational components basically is meant to present information. So they receive props with the information to show, and then they will show the information in some ways in the form of, like we saw before, a title with a paragraph, a table, whatever. Okay, if we pass an array as a prop, we will show a table and so on. Okay, of course we need to write something more complex here inside, like a for loop or something like this to create the various rows and so on, but we can do that. And then there are container components that are the ones that are supposed to manage the state of the application. What's the state? It's the data that changes over time to make the application work according to the user interaction. Okay, so the data that has been loaded from the server, the interaction that the user has done with the application, opening, closing stuff, clicking, writing in the forms, and so on. Okay. Typically, container components contains inside the presentational components. Okay, so there's a hierarchy structure of components, like the elements in the DOM tree. Right? We have a container component that will contain other container components. At a certain point, there will be presentational components and so on. Okay, presentational components might have some internal state, but uniquely for presentation purposes. Like we have a list and we would like to shorten or open the list. Okay, just a simple state just to manage how they appear. Okay. Okay. Properties are passed to a component by its parents. So there's a hierarchy, as I was saying before, of components. So we will start with the first component that will be typically called app. The app component is the root component. It will decide to pass some properties to each of the children components and so on until we reach the leaves of the tree. Okay. Remember that we can also pass functions, not only values, in the properties of the components, in the props of the components. So basically, it is possible to call functions that act on parent components from children components, because we can pass the functions as properties of props. Okay? Functions, they are JavaScript functions, they can be passed around as usual. Okay? So wherever you have an handle that or reference to a function, you can call the function. Okay. But we will see examples. This is just an introduction to give you an overview of where we are going to go. Okay. State is a set of variables which is local to the component. It will be initialized and mutate according to specific methods that depends on how on the React's philosophy. Okay. The state can be passed as props to the children, to other children components. Okay. But we will come back to the state when it's needed. Okay. Just let me check. Yes, everything is recorded. Okay, and so just to recap how things work, we have a tree of components. Some have a state. The state is passed, is either used or passed as props to the children components. When something changes, state or props, React computes what has changed, which functions of the components it needs to call. It calls it, it gets the result, and it will update the view. Okay, so this from state to view. Okay, and then And then we wait, as usual in a web application. We don't do anything until the user acts and do something. So the user will click, move the mouse, type something in a form, and so on. And so some actions will be executed according to the event listeners that we created already in the components. Okay, so we attach some code to the click or whatever events that happen in the application. This code typically changes the state of the application, and this triggers again the cycle. So React sees that the state has changed and it updates the view. And then we stop again here, waiting for other actions. Okay, there could be user actions, typically what happens in a web application, but can also be asynchronous actions, like we asked for information from the server, and at a certain point the information arrives. And so again, we have a function, a callback attached to this event. We saw the fetch last time, right? A fetch, we have a promise, we have then, and the callback. And this callback, again, we will update the state, and the state will trigger an update of the view. And so the information will be shown. Okay, that's the cycle, the way in which React works. Okay. Okay, state is always owned by one component, one single component. And so basically the state is only available to children component. It means that sometimes the state will be at the up level, because if we need to have this information about the state in any component, it has to be at the up level. But again, this is something that we will see in more details later when we talked about the state. I don't want to spend too much time. I think I already spoke too much, right? Because, you know, an example is worth 1,000 words, right? So let's try to create the first application, React application. So this is the stuff that we actually need to do, but I mean, we will not do them manually. Of course, we need to import the React library. It's a library, it's a package, an npm package in short. We would like to use the JSX, so we need the translator, right? So the stuff that understand the HTML or kind of HTML, and it creates the JavaScript code. We need a web server as well, because we would like to import modules, and we say that when you import modules, you need to serve them from a web server, otherwise modules, I mean, from local files don't work. And then, okay, there's minor stuff, like there are functions useful for older browsers, so the polyfills, that means libraries that help you to implement functions that are not available in older versions of browsers and stuff like that. And of course, we would like to have an efficient way of developing stuff. And so how do we translate all this stuff in practice? Well, actually, there's a script that we propose here to use to create your first template of a React application. This is not the only one. Actually, a few years ago, we were using another one, Create a React App, I think. But this is, you know, more convenient, at least at the moment. I mean, nothing. There are many, but this is one of the simplest, and we encourage you to use this one. Okay, so we will try to follow these instructions just right now. Okay, so we can experiment with the rest of the stuff that is on the slides. We just open Visual Studio Code. I think we create a new folder. No, we will not create a new folder. We open the terminal, sorry. Where is the terminal? Here, it's too big. New terminal. I go in the folder I like, and so npm create Vite at latest my app. Okay, and npm create Vite. Vite is the name of this a package that helps us to create a template and everything. Latest. And my app is the name I choose for my application. Okay? Enrico 1, test 1, whatever you like. Okay? Okay, the first time it says I need to install the following package, create byte 631. It's fine, yes. Okay. So basically it downloads a package that contains a script to run to create all the stuff that we need for React. Okay. Yes, and then we need to choose React, because this is a script that can create a lot of types of projects and stuff. React, and then we will choose JavaScript. Okay. Okay, that's done, more or less. Okay, so we have a My App folder with some stuff inside already. So a basic React application that we're going to see in a minute. So a lot of stuff that has already been written for us by this Vite package. Okay, but before using it, we need to install all the packages, including React, right? So, because if you just try to run npm run dev, a lot of stuff is missing, okay? So, oh, sorry, my app. I had to do package is missing. But I mean, a lot of stuff is missing. So, npm install. And the package JSON is already there. Yes. You see the dependency, React DOM, and a lot of other stuff. npm install, it takes a while, especially the first time. I already did in the office, so I think there are something is cached here. But just to give you an idea, yeah, there are 59 megabytes of stuff. Okay. This is for development, okay? Then the stuff that actually is needed by React is much less. This is the transpiler and all the development library and a lot of stuff, okay? Good, and then we said how to run it, npm run dev. It's always this command, okay? So because in the package JSON, there is an entry that is dev that says what to run. And basically it runs a web server. Okay, it's not based on Express, but actually we don't care. It's managed by the Vite package, so we don't really care. We will have our server for our APIs, and this one, but just for development at the moment. And so you just navigate to this URL, and we'll see the result. Well, actually, this is a spoiler. I shouldn't have shown it. Okay, this is the application created by the create of Vite create. Okay, very simple stuff. It's always the same. Okay, so there's a button you can play with, and it says edit source / app.jsx to write something in React. Okay. Just to show you that we have that extension available. You remember the React developer tools. Now, if you open a React application, actually in developer mode, so the mode that we will use during this course, here you can see the components. This is a very simple component application, so there is just one component up, but you can inspect the state of the component and stuff like that. So these two tabs will appear only with this extension. Okay, they are not the default inside the browser. Okay, so let's see what has been created. Actually, that's a structure. Okay, that's the same stuff that we can see in Visual Studio Code. That's the My App folder. The node modules, well, everything is installed, as we already saw with the server part. When you do npm install, or npm clean install, everything goes there, the packages and so on, package JSON, package lock, etc. And what is interesting for us is that there is an index HTML file that loads a main JSX file that in turn mounts, that means loads the app JSX that contains the first React component. Okay? And actually we should develop here. So that's the place where we start writing React code. Okay? Just for this lecture, just for the sake of curiosity, we are going to see what's contained inside the two files, the index HTML main JSX. Just to tell you, that the story I told you is true. Okay, so I know you trust me, but index JSX. Okay, you see body, div id root, script module source src main JSX. That's the place where all the application will be put. Okay, get element by id root and then append everything there. And indeed the HTML is empty. You see, it's empty. But we saw something in the browser, right? Everything has been created from scratch by React. And also we load, this file is loaded main JSX as a module. So this is JavaScript, src main JSX. And you see this looks like JavaScript. And actually there's this create root render that we saw before in the slides. Okay? And what does it render? Well, actually it renders the app component. Okay? And the app component is the place where we are going to write some code, which is app.jsx, and this is a function. Actually, without props, okay? No props because, React has no props to pass to our root component, okay? If we need to create stuff and so on, we need to write it ourselves, okay? Okay, good. So that's the main thing we need to see. Oh, okay. Here we can use the import keyword to import anything we need, any package, any files that we need to have available in our source code. It's JavaScript. So what we saw last time about modules, it applies here. Okay. So why the files are called JSX? Well, actually, I can give any extension to files, right? So as long as they are interpreted as JavaScript, I can execute any file with any name, right? But typically, to keep things ordered, when the content may contain JSX syntax, we call the files.jsx. So basically the transpiler knows that it has to process the file and it converts it to JavaScript code and so on. Okay? So just use the JSX extension and you're okay. Everything is fine. You see the main import React. Okay? And it also import app from app.jsx. Okay? And indeed, in app.jsx, in the end, there is export only one element, export default app. Okay? We don't need and we must not touch this line. Okay? Otherwise, of course, we break the application. And then what you write here is what you can change. Okay? So basically, this is the component, the root component that we saw before. This is the basic stuff that came from Vite. So it's very simple components with a state and a return value that contains some div. And this shows us the stuff we saw before, this stuff. Okay? Okay, so we are ready to try using React. That is what you are going to do tomorrow in the lab. Okay? So we see now just a few examples without trying to understand really everything, but just to get a feeling on how React programming looks like. Okay, and then later in the second half of the lecture, we will try to start using the props. Okay, so we will talk a little bit more about props and try to use them. So this is the first example, and maybe you would like to use it, right? Try it. So we have a button. We pass a property. So I'm guiding you now because you don't know the JSX syntax. You don't know how to use props and state and so on. So I'm just telling you what's inside this example, right? So we define a custom component button. Okay, app is already there. I mean, it's been written by White, right? Button, it's our button. We define our button. For function button, we take some props, and what you pass here as attribute, it's set as props by React. So we will have a props.lang, that is this attribute lang here, IT. We will show a button with the text ciao in Italian, or hello if it's not IT, that means English or whatever. Okay. So how do we try this example? Well, we just do a bit of copy and paste and in that template that we have, and we try to use it. Okay. So I think I already have a few files that I made available to you. Yes, these are on the Git. Okay, for your convenience. Just copy and paste from the slides, because sometimes when you copy and paste from the slides, something becomes unformatted and stuff. So copy, and let's go to our app, right? So we just delete everything, right? Don't delete the export default, because without the export default nothing works. Okay, and then I do copy and paste of the slide example. Okay, so now I save. I didn't save yet. Let's save. No, this is more or less like the NodeMon. I mean, it's not NodeMon, it's something similar. But basically, it recognizes that some file has changed and it reloads the application. So let's see the result. You see, this is the result of the code. Of course, it's much worse, less code and ugly. Okay, but there's a button, ciao. It doesn't work, but it's not supposed to work. It's just a component that receives a prop. Remember, the props are read-only. There's no state. There's no event listener. Okay. But you see here, we have the components open here, and you see that's an app which has a child button, and the button takes a prop whose name is lang, and the value is IT. Okay. Let's change it. Now we change the code, right? So we have no alternative. We don't have an event handler. We cannot click and we cannot do anything. And save. Times 3 means, again, another message like this. And you see hello here. And you see that the props is n now. The value is n. Okay? Of course, it's simply a button, and the button without an event handler does nothing. Right? But at least we have a first React application with two components. One component has been defined by us. That's a button, which actually, this button, be uppercase, it just uses the traditional HTML button element. I mean, we are not supposed to create everything from scratch. We are using HTML elements, okay? To create all the stuff that we want to show. I mean, we have lists, we have tables, we have paragraphs, headers, and the stuff that you learned in the lab last week. Okay, and that you can search online in case you need anything. Okay. And so what is this component doing? Well, it takes the props, if props lang IT, it returns button chow button. So this is JSX, okay? So it returns something that is the way in which the component should appear. Else, the other way in which the component should appear, okay? And React, when it needs to render the button be uppercase component, it goes there, it passes the props, it runs the function, it takes the return value, and it uses the return value, put it into the virtual DOM. Difference with the old virtual DOM, updates the actual DOM of the browser. That's all, okay? Every time you change something in the props, React will call again this function, the button be uppercase, and it will get the return value, difference, and update the virtual DOM, the DOM actually. Update the virtual DOM, and then after the difference, the actual DOM of the browser. You can, of course, put stuff into a separate file, and that's the way in which you normally work, because you don't want to put all the functions into app, right? I mean, it becomes very, very long and difficult to manage. And so now you can import stuff from other files. You know how to do. And I mean, it's quite easy. I mean, it's like the app that has been prepared for us by White. Okay, I think there's the example. There are the files here, but I mean, it's exactly the same. Okay, I will not test this. Let's test something different. Okay, something with the state. Again, you need to be guided at this time. The state is the topic for next lecture. So, since we would like to see something a bit more interesting than just, you know, a button that shows what is written in the code, but we would like to introduce some dynamic behavior, just again to give you the flavor of how to use React and the powerfulness of React. We introduce a state that is changed according to some user event. Click on the button. Okay? So this button JSX, let's try it. So again, Visual Studio Code, button JSX. No, I don't like this one. This uses React Bootstrap already. Example button state. This one. Okay. Okay, so copy and paste, and we will change the function button here. Okay. So this is the one we just tested. And this is the new function button. Save. Something is missing. Let's see what is missing. No, let's see in the browser. Use state has already been declared. Maybe it was already there. Sorry. Yes. Okay, I cannot import the same stuff twice. Okay. That's because White already imported the state because it wanted to use the state. Okay. Okay, good. So now let's see the result. It looks like before, right? This time if I click on the button, it changes the content. Okay? Why? Because there is a state in button. You see props here. Props is passed by up and it will be always the same, but there is a state here. We will talk about state, okay? But see that every time I click, this stuff changes. Click and click IT, click and so on. Not really immediate, it's a debugger. I mean, it needs to take its time to show what happened in the components, okay? Inspecting the components and so on. Okay, so what happened? Well, actually, we have a button, we pass a property in the beginning. Remember, properties are read-only inside the component, so we cannot change props. We cannot change props.lang. Props.lang equal to something. It has no effect, only confuse ideas and React. Okay? If we would like to have a state, we need to say React, we would like to create a state, use state. And you see that the use state comes from React here. Okay, use state, an initial value, fine, and it gives us the value of the state and the function to modify the state. Okay, and this function to modify the state will be used here, attaching to an event, on-click event. Okay, so that's a more convenient syntax than add event listener and so on. Okay. We could have used this syntax in the lab as well, but it has a lot of disadvantages and so on. In React here, it's used in a very controlled way because React parses the JSX. It finds this on something, which are actual events you can handle with the functions, and it attaches the callbacks automatically on those virtual synthesized events that we said before. Okay, well, in short, when the button is clicked, we execute this callback. You see, it's a callback, it's a function. It takes no parameter, it's an arrow function, and it executes just one call, that is set button lang n, or the other IT. Okay, and you see that there's nothing that says change how the component appears. We don't call render or whatever, okay? Everything is automatic. That's the powerfulness of React, okay? We change a state, we change a prop. I mean, a prop, of course, I mean, here we need to change the code, but I mean, the prop can also be a state passed by another upper level component, okay? Anyway, we change a state or a prop, and React takes care of changing the way in which the application appears. And it's consistent with the state and the props that you have in your application. Okay, that's the powerfulness of the framework. Actually, that's not the only way in which you can design a web application. Of course, from this point towards the end of the course, we will only talk about how React works. If you take another framework, it might use a different approach. React has this approach. Props and state define how the application appears. And if you want to change something, you need to change either props or state. Okay? And so everything happens in a controlled way, and also, as we said, very efficiently and so on. Okay? Good. So we tested this example. Let's see what is left yet. Well, of course, you learned Bootstrap, right? It's very convenient. It's very nice looking, good appearance, good layouting, and so on. How do we use it in React? Well, the best way to use Bootstrap is to use the components, the React components provided by somebody who took Bootstrap and created the corresponding components. Actually, there is a package that is called React Bootstrap that provides you many React components that mimic the various Bootstrap classes. Okay? You remember that you had to write div class equal container or container fluid, div class equal row, div class equal call 6, call 3, call whatever, and so on. Okay? But this is just a very simple example. I mean, this is for the layout, but you have components for basically everything. You have the table component, you have the list component, you have the form components, and everything you might think of. Okay? How can we use them? Well, actually, that's the way in which we should import the stuff and, use it. So let's try. Okay. Uh, so let's take this code. I'm doing it with you because you're supposed to do it in this stuff in the lab tomorrow. Okay. So bootstrap example button. Okay. So let's put this stuff into a file. So we also practice with files, imports and stuff. Okay. So we put it into, what's the name of button JSX. Okay. So we create a file. Everything is in src. Okay, where app.jsx is. New file button JSX, which is of course empty in the beginning. Import use state, etc., etc., etc. Export default my button. Save. Okay. And now in app, I delete the button. And I need to import that button, right? So in app, I think we have the example here. Yes. Okay. Let's go in app. And we substitute everything. I mean, React logo, white logo, and so on. I mean, we don't care. They've been put there because of the template. I wanted to show you two nice icons, but I mean, we don't really care. We can eliminate everything. The only thing we need to keep is export default app. Okay? So save. And of course, don't forget that everything you import has to be installed if it's not yet present. So let's stop because the React server, so npm run dev, and npm install bootstrap. Note, I can install bootstrap in this way. Okay, thing that you couldn't do in the lab, but now everything is convenient because everything is being configured in a very nice way by this white package. And basically we can even import bootstrap in this way. Okay, and then you just need to import the CSS in this way in the JavaScript. And of course, it's not that magically CSS becomes JavaScript. It's because there is this transpiler that takes care of arranging everything in a way that is suitable for JavaScript. Okay. Good. And then I also have to install React Bootstrap. React Bootstrap. It depends on the network connection. Of course, you need the network connection to download these packages. Let's see if we have everything. So npm run dev. If everything is fine, it just run. Okay. Let's go to the browser. I think we need to reload. Sometimes it cannot update automatically. Yeah, after a while it updates. I don't know. I did nothing. Well, in any case, if you're unsure, just reload or open it, close and open the tab again. Okay? Okay, good. So now it's working, right? And you recognize the style of the bootstrap button, right? It's blue. I know you might like it or not, but I mean, this my button is in button, which is actually the button with the uppercase B. We imported this button from React Bootstrap. Okay, just be careful not to mix the names. If you already use button as we did before, you need to either change your name or rename the bootstrap element, but it's better to keep the bootstrap elements untouched, so we remember they are the bootstrap ones. Just change your names, like my button, button 2, whatever. Okay. And yeah, you see that the classes sometimes become attributes in this React Bootstrap. Actually, I have no general rule to give you. Just try or look in the documentation or search in Google or ask ChatGPT, whatever you like. I mean, most of the characteristics of the components have been mapped to attributes, which are actually, for the purpose of React, they are props passed to the Bootstrap component. Okay? Indeed, I think if we write secondary here, I think it's secondary, right? Just save it. So you see that it changes the appearance. Okay? It works like as it used to work in Bootstrap. There's still one thing I don't like. You see, it's on the left side and the middle of the page. Why? Well, just don't forget about this. I mean, the template filled the CSS of index and app with a lot of stuff, which actually to center the icons, the button and stuff like that. Just take everything and delete everything. Save. Take everything, delete everything, save. Okay? Or exclude the import, but I mean, it's easier to leave the import there, because in case you would like to write some CSS rules, you can write them in app CSS, and it's already imported, it's already available to your application. You don't have to write anything. Okay? And not even a single import. Let's see the result. Yeah, actually, I don't want to say it's much better, but at least it's different, right? Let's see. Always check the console if there are errors and so on. I cannot tell you exactly why it's not really on the left side. Maybe because the call, maybe it's container fluid. I don't remember now. It's how you write a container fluid. I'll check in the break. You are always free to use the inspector, okay? So I think the body, so the div here, for some reason restricted the active part of the page. Probably because it's not fluid, but I'm not sure. I will check in the let's do a test. No, container fluid, right? Was like this? Yes. This is just a quick test. I mean, just debugging for me. But if I want to make it permanent, I need to find a way in which I can tell the container component of Bootstrap to be container fluid and not container not fluid. Okay? Okay, but I need to search in the documentation. I don't want to lose time. So, let's arrive at the end. Yeah, that's what we saw. So, basically, we moved the first steps with Bootstrap, with React, and we also introduced Bootstrap. That now is very simple. Okay, much less complicated than last time. You remember all the stuff you had to do, including the script, the link to the CSS, the integrity, and so on. By the way, what is the integrity? Well, actually, has anyone any idea if we are protected from the problem that we solved with the integrity or not? No? So, now we installed the Bootstrap and React Bootstrap in our project. So basically, we downloaded the library and the CSS. And so now the CSS is served together with our application. So the integrity is not needed anymore. Actually, the integrity, if you really want to, think in these terms, it's here in some places. React Bootstrap in the package lock JSON somewhere. There's there's a Bootstrap. Let me find Bootstrap. Okay. When we install the package, you trusted the package the first time, and then you have the integrity there in case you want to reconstruct the project. Okay. But then it's served from your web server. So we are not using the CDN again. Okay, if you would like to use the CDN, you need to change the way in which things are imported, but it's more complicated and we are not going to see it. Okay, good. So just before the break, a small recap. So that's the long road we have in front of us until the end of the course. The turn. I mean, we are going to see props in the next hour and a half. A little bit of JSX. So the peculiarity of JSX, something you need to be careful about. And then next time, state and hooks, which are a way to create the state and so on. And then we will talk about events, forms, the life cycle that basically allows us to load the information from the server. So at the point of the life cycle of the components, we will be able to load information from the API server that we have. And we will be almost a month later, okay, from now. A router, that means updating the URLs that appears in the browser window, well, actually on top of the browser window, because you remember we cannot reload the page. So we need to have some ways of updating that URL as we are used to do with, let's say, non-single page application. Okay? And then these three dots, I would say authentication. Okay? And all the stuff that is related to the authentication, that is basically the end of the course. Okay? So if you have any questions or comments, I'm glad to answer. Otherwise, I think we can break again, 10 minutes, something like this. And in the second part, we will talk about props, the first topic. And then tomorrow, you experiment with your application. You transform it in a React application, as we will do in the next lecture for our application. Okay? Okay, thank you. Let's break for 10 minutes, something like this.